Okay. So first of all, I just want to start by saying that I'm not like the best public speaker, so just bear with me if I do stutter and take time and repeat myself. So I do apologise about that to start with. As well as that, I just want to start by defining what I've used as a definition for young people in my piece. So it's in my piece, it's not just based on referencing people aged 18 and 24, which is based on usually data analysis, but as well referring to people as young as 16, because those are still important demographics when targeting voting, especially, for example, in the next election, come 2024, these people will be of voting age, and it is important that these people feel that their needs are being addressed, especially at the moment. In terms of what research I've looked at, in the BBC, they found in 2014 that 31% of 16 to 24-year-olds were fairly or very interested in politics, in comparison to groups from data analysis of 55 years and older. That's half of those demographic are more involved in politics. In the UK Parliament records published in 2018, by academics Andrew Mycock and Jonathan Tung, they wrote that many young people see politicians as self-serving and that political parties as indifferent in their interests. Obviously, we all know this is completely different when being inside, but when you're on the outside and not involved in politics, this can seem very different. With between 18 and 24-year-olds report low levels of knowledge around politics, which is the second biggest demographic behind a demographic of 65 years plus. They do not necessarily hold more negative attitudes towards the political system overall, though. In an IPOS study of the 2015 general election, only 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds turned out to vote. In the EU referendum, it was reported one of the lowest for 18 to 24-year-old demographic at 36%. However, in the 2017 election, young people's voter turnout had propelled up to 64%, with Labour gaining 62% of the young vote. Overall, the 2017 election was seen as one of the most successful for changing the youth political landslide. So I think when looking at especially elections like this, we need to look at what was so successful about the 2017 election gaining a massive overhaul of young people being involved, going out and voting, whether helping canvassing or not. And most of that was down to the fact that Labour beat the Conservatives at the social media battle. So most of Labour adverts and media campaigns at the time were directly aimed at specific demographics, and most of it was aimed at younger voters. So we do, I remember 2017 being a young person not being able to vote. I was still very interested and invested within the election because of the type of morals I had as a person then. And I found that in Labour, that's something I shared. I was very on board and hands-on with it. I'm very on board with doing stuff continually now on social media. So when seeing social media posts by Labour and supporting Labour figures, with those directed at younger people who are more likely to use social media, you're more likely to get more political interactions with these younger people, and they're more likely to go out and vote and take on board those things. So that's something I have mentioned within my piece, of something I believe the CLP and Labour overall nationally can do more to get young people involved in politics. As well as this, I've mentioned a lot about education, because overall in the UK, 45% of people have no knowledge of Parliament or how it operates. And as well as this, these people claim to vote with certainty in elections. And this is very concerning, especially at the moment, where you've got, especially with the media, when they spread, like you've got media misinformation, stuff that's being spread. And if people don't know about how Parliament works, anything about politics at all, but they're saying that they can vote with certainty in elections, but it's a bit worrying about how we end up with an establishment, especially as we have now. In terms of young people, I know personally, a lot of young people my own age don't know about the party systems, don't know about voting. They don't bother voting because they have no way of being taught, being educated on how the system works or what party does, what parties aspects these people support. So without doing that, loads of young people, whether 18 or over, are disenfranchised because they don't care about voting. And again, that is something that is particularly concerning. And I think overall, a big movement Labour should focus on is making sure that in schools, possibly in independent education, because not all students go on to do college or university, where when you look at the demographics, most Labour voters are at university. University students are one of the big demographics of people who do support the same type of things Labour support. So when looking at school leavers and that gap between school and university, how can Labour act to get more of those cohorts of people, especially when a lot of those people haven't been taught critical thinking skills, being able to go out and research stuff by themselves and not taught how politics works. And that comes on to one of, and again, I find a point I think so important. For most young people, we learn about politics through our families and how our families talk to us about how they go out and vote. Personally, for myself, I'm not sure about anyone else, but I think we can all reflect on how we learned about politics. And I've learned about it at a young age. When I learned about politics, my family were like, we're pro-Labour because of the way taxation works. We earn less, we should pay less in tax, whereas people who earn more should pay more. Whereas the Conservatives don't see it that way. They want to give tax breaks to the rich and make more of the people who earn less compared to the corporations pay more compared to them who get tax breaks. So that's how I learned about politics. But as I grew up, I learned more based on it being looking at the morals of the party, looking at other social issues and which parties fell into supporting this. So I do think the way how family aspects work dictate how children view politics. And I do think as well, this is quite concerning at the moment, considering a lot of Labour heartlands have turned against the party in terms of Brexit. So I think within the next few years, especially in families where they're very anti-Labour at the moment due to Brexit and may not return to Labour after it, these younger people may also intake the views of their parents. And that's why I think it is important in schools and other educational placements that critical thinking skills can be taught so people can go out and think for themselves. Because if you are constantly being told by what to think by parents or how to view the world, you're not taking on this, you're basically not learning how to think for yourself in aspects, and basically having other people's opinions put onto you at face value and just taking them how it is without being able to critically think whether this is right or going to look at other materials that might disprove this. And as well, this comes on to the idea, especially around the media. We've all seen the media come out and say in the past about doctors, NHS workers, all false information about the EU referendum. And if people haven't learned how to think for themselves, be able to critically think, which are skills that need to be taught within the young political aspect, that they go out and believe everything the media says and unable to think, I keep coming back to, unable to think for themselves based on that. So I do think overall, whether national or local level, this idea of pushing for better education, especially with regards to how the political system works, is a big important thing that I think Labour should focus on. As well, for myself, when I came to university, I was very involved in politics. I didn't do I did political history at A levels. If I did do that, I wouldn't have known how Labour worked, about CLPs, anything like that. So I do think, again, going back to how social media should be better utilised, making sure that we're engaging more in local debates, making sure we're putting up more posts that are more widely shared or in community-like groups, will help bring more attention to the CLP. Because I had to, for example, for me to join the CLP, I went out and looked for it. If I didn't know anything about CLPs or how Labour run, I don't think I particularly would have joined, because I wouldn't have known anything about local politics, how anything worked, because again, all the links tie back to each other with education. No one knows how it works unless you get into the higher bands of education. Then you don't know how the political system works unless you're taught by it by parents, and then that could be very one-sided again. As well as that, I've also mentioned in my article about like taster sessions. So one of the things that Thomas mentioned at the start that I was unaware of was with just the no politics sessions, that anyone is pretty much able to come in and talk about it as long as pretty much share the same views. I do think that is like a good step, obviously in the right direction, because you could get more young people involved in this, fighting for more young people's issues, especially local issues. I'm not from Newcastle, so I don't know a lot of the young local views around the area. But in my own area, the Stourbridge CLP is very engaged with young issues facing young people. So I do believe, and I do already think with the CLP, you do focus a lot on especially issues faced by university students, but looking at, for example, stuff faced by 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds who will age into the voter demographic is very important. One of the main issues that I know that's ignored in my area, Stourbridge, was when the GCSE system changed. There's a massive increase in the amount of younger people who are going into being referred for mental health issues, and that was something that was ignored. There was no like pressure or fight against how the GCSE system was affecting many students with stress, because it became worse than higher up like A-level education. I think that whole aspect was ignored. So if loads of young people are feeling that their issues are being ignored and not addressed by political parties, then it's obviously going to put them off and make them less likely to want to join. But overall, I do think Labour have done a better job at addressing issues of young people overall. But I know there is it is more nationally at what needs to be fought for. But with in aspects for the CLP, as long as we focus on local issues, stuff that's facing local people, try to get more young people involved, using social media as more of a platform to highlight issues faced by young people and try to do our best to tackle these, then I think we can get more young people involved in politics.